Welcome to MediaMaker Spotlight from women in film and video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight, and inspiration.
Welcome to MediaMaker Spotlight. Now for part 2 of Filmmaker Chats, direct from Ebertfest, episode 106. Take it away, Brandon.
Really excited to share my final round of interviews here at Ebertfest. I had the really great opportunity to speak with filmmaker Angus MacLachlan, who many listeners may know as the writer of 2005's JUNEBUG, starring Amy Adams. And he has an equally just really impressive feature that he screened here at the festival called A Little Prayer. And then to wrap up the whole entire Ebertfest interviews, I have a conversation with organist and silent film specialist Stephen Ball, who is an artist in residence at Tampa Theater and just has really excellent insight into how he's able to pair music with silent film. Really excited to share what I was able to learn at Ebertfest and looking forward for our listeners to be hearing that as well. I am happy to be joined today by filmmaker Angus MacLachlan. Today, his film A Little Prayer screened at Ebertfest, and we are going to be speaking specifically about his process of writing, directing the feature, and take it from there. So I'm very happy to be joined today by Angus.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Nice to be here.
So your film premiered at Sundance back in 2023. I had the privilege of seeing it during that virtual hybrid, of being in person. I saw it online, and just really great to be able to see the movie back in the theater, play like gangbusters with the audience as well. What has it been like just on the festival circuit, premiering the movie, seeing the audience reactions? Because there's an extremely warm reception here at Ebertfest.
Yeah, you know, for a lot of independent films, the theatrical experience, sometimes you don't get any distribution. And so the only way people get to see it with an audience is at film festivals. And generally, the people who come to film festivals want to have a good time. So my experience has been that they're generally really warm and responding to the whole event. And it is very different to experience a movie with a large audience on a big screen with great sound and, you know, great picture.
Being a graduate of University of North Carolina School of Arts and having this film set in Winston-Salem in North Carolina, what did you really see that setting being able to contribute towards your overall story of a family that's very close?
Well, I wrote it to take place in a specific neighborhood in Winston-Salem called Connell Kills, and that's where we actually shot it. My experience has been when you bring actors to the place where the story is set, through osmosis, they gain a lot of color and they have an ear, they talk to other people in the area so that the accents are right. I do have to mention that not only am I a graduate of the School of the Arts, I went to their drama school, but Celia Weston, who's in the movie, went there. Steve Coulter, who plays the veteran at the funeral, he was a graduate, and Anna Camp. So we had a lot of the alumni in the film.
That's fascinating too. And you were filming during a lot of COVID restrictions. So it must have been nice to have, I guess, a really close community that also knows the area very well and could contribute in that factor too.
Yeah, none of them lived there, but they knew about who they were trying to portray.
Yes, and we did speak about this during the panel following the film screening as well, but it really is through the eyes of Bill. So just love to hear more about why you chose that really interesting perspective and what that really brought to the table.
When I write, I often write very intuitively, and in retrospect, I understand what I'm writing about. And so the main character is a man who is dealing with his adult children, and I started writing this 8.5 years ago when my daughter was 15. Now she's 23. And I realized in retrospect that I was writing about letting her grow up and go, and how the sort of struggle and pain of being the parent of an adult child, how you still want to protect them and tell them what to do and you can't anymore. But it's only because it took so long to make that I realized, well, that was sort of my in on understanding the whole story. And so that's David Strathairn's character.
I did see a nice reflection or an inverse in a sense of David Strathairn's daughter played by Anna Camp, who I guess generously does not have it all together, but also the inverse of his daughter-in-law, Jane Levy, definitely have I'd say, a stronger head on her shoulders. And even though they're not blood related, still being able to parent adults in that sense too that might not be his daughter.
And I find it interesting This is a story about a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law and how close they are. And I like stories that are not what you would expect, that these two characters have more of a kinship than he does, although he loves his actual son and daughter. I thought that these characters, played by David Strathairn and Jane Levy, just connect more. They're more akin to each other.
Absolutely, yeah. And really the film, I'd say, does have that perspective from David Strathairn's character, but does really change perspective during a really pivotal scene. So I'd just love to hear a bit more about changing that perspective a little bit later in the film and just seeing through her eyes.
Well, because I was an actor, I always want to create characters that aren't just one-dimensional. Even the smallest roles, I want to be able to see, something that's has a little depth or interest or surprise with them. So yes, Jane Levy is a terrific actor who had a NBC TV series called Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, which was basically a musical comedy. So she can sing and dance and do comedy. In this, I really needed an actor who had a really strong inner life, because although she doesn't have maybe as much dialogue as some of the other characters, the camera is on her quite a bit, and when we know what's going on with her, it's kind of interior. It's when she's private and by herself. And she brings so much inner life to the performance that I think actually, if one were to see the movie more than once, you'd see that you do see her throughout all the way. But when you watch it the first time, it's like, well, she's not saying too much. And then suddenly she gets to be, as you were referring to, a focus in the middle of the film, and then goes, under again. But and then she has this big scene at the end. But she, to me, is there all the time.
Absolutely. And I feel like just some of the works that I've seen her in, she's very versatile. Anything from horror. I know she was in the 2013 Evil Dead remake, carried that. Really, I think, just challenging role. But was there a specific role you saw previously that's really kind of opened your eyes to seeing what she was capable of?
I actually didn't know her work. I worked with a great casting director, Mark Bennett, and we had talked about some other people. And then he said, "What about Jane Levy?" And I said, "Okay." And I just spoke to her. I don't really believe in auditioning for the main roles. Of course, for the smaller roles, I do. But for the main roles, people that have careers, it's just, if I know of their work, if they come recommended, I like to talk to them about it. And I just thought she had this quality that I wanted in this character. And it wasn't until after I cast her that I saw clips from Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, and I was like, oh my God, she's so good. She can dance, she can sing, she can do physical comedy. I think she's actually a real physical comedian. So it's kind of like I bought it.
Bought your stock early.
Yeah, before I even knew how valuable she was.
That said, when it comes to casting as well, I feel like, as it's mentioned in the film, they do see each other as kindred spirits. So was there a little bit of sigh of relief when you saw, say, a table read with David Strathairn and Jane Levy just really having really strong chemistry?
Yeah, well, we had one day of rehearsal, in quotes, which was just basically the main characters reading the script out loud. It really was just the process of doing it. And again, it's my thanks to them as terrific actors that they just suddenly were able to perform as a family, having lifelong relationships. And I couldn't have been more pleased.
And as a playwright, too, I know you had adapted your previous play, Stone, back in 2010, starring Mila Jovovich, Robert De Niro, and Edward Norton. Did you ever see this film as potentially a play, or did you always see it as a film?
No, this one I didn't. Actually, JUNEBUG was a play as well, originally. But this one came to me as thinking it would be cinema. And, it's not action-packed, and it's a family, and a lot of it, we have like 13 scenes in the kitchen. But I think it is cinematic. I love actors. There are a lot of great movies that are made with non-actors, that are very naturalistic. But I really love actors because they can have more than one level at the same time and have so many things going on. So I think that makes this very cinematic experience because you see their faces. Like one of my favorite, of course, directors is Bergman, he's all about the face and, what's going on behind it. And that to me is cinema. I mean, I love that aspect.
I know a number of your actors from previous films did show up in this, and Celia Weston was also in a couple of your past movies, as well as Anna Camp. So,
and Steve Coulter has been in 3 of them, I think. Yeah, 3.
What's that like? Is it just you guys leave a certain filming of like we'll get back together, or like is it just like you ring them up and see if they're free for a given time period?
It's that. It's my good fortune. I mean, and I really love their work, and they're wonderful people. So if I have a role, I think, yeah, let's see if Celia will do it. Let's see if Steve Coulter will do it.
Yeah, and I feel like the film just plays really well to an audience. Just out of curiosity, too, when you are going through the festival circuit with this film, how often do people come up to you and just say, oh my God, this character reminds me of my sister-in-law, is just like my dad, or it's just, reflective of my relationship with, say, my own brother-in-law?
It happens a lot. It happens a lot. I often tell the story about JUNEBUG, which we were at the Dubai Film Festival, and we had people come up and say, that's my family, And so, yes, I mean, that's what you hope for, that you tell something that has, I guess, such specificity that it does become universal and, you can feel it. I mean, that's what I feel like I love about film, is when you can identify with the person or understand, even sometimes it expresses something that you felt, but you didn't really know if anybody else felt that way. And that makes you feel connected.
Yeah, I feel like you really can see the writer's touch directing as well. Just some of these characters, you might not agree with all their decisions, but I feel like they're just very fleshed out, and you're really able to see non-judgmentally just why they may pursue that with some empathy as well.
Yeah, another director that I adore is Jean Renoir, and his famous quote is, everybody has their reasons. And, I think that that's just so true in life, and it's what I intend or try to do in my filmmaking.
And Chaz Ebert, overseeing Ebertfest this week, has said on a number of occasions, just the fantastic quote from Roger Ebert of likening movies to empathy machines. So what is it like screening your film here at Ebertfest that maybe, is not indicative of other festivals?
It's great. Roger Ebert was very supportive and wrote a really wonderful review of JUNEBUG. And so when I was invited to bring this film here, it's a great honor. And Chaz has done such a great job continuing the festival. And she's so warm and seems to love film and filmmakers. And my experience has been the same here. We screened at 10:30 in the morning, but we had a great size audience who were very lively and responsive. And that's a joy.
Taking it from there, I know that you had said previously that in JUNEBUG, Amy Adams was inspired by your own sister-in-law.
Yeah.
Is there anything, and I'm sorry if I bring that up, if that was kind of,
No.
quote from years ago.
She knows about it.
Okay, she's cool with that. Is there anybody in A Little Prayer that maybe might have been inspired by somebody in your own life?
No, not specific. And that was the only character, the Amy Adams character, that I can think of in all the films that I've written and plays, where there really was someone that was inspired by. And it was more her spirit, that my sister-in-law is just a very open, loving, effusive kind of person with a very strong, almost naive heart. And that's what I thought the essence of Amy's character was in that, Ashley. But this one, no, there was not anyone that I based these characters on that I knew in real life, other than my observation of
and some experiences,
right,
parenting adults too.
All right.
Yeah, and just as the film did play so well with the crowd, is there any kind of deals upcoming for distribution, or what does that look like in the future? Because I feel like it's a great film and just love more people to see it, because I feel like it plays very well, especially for word of mouth for audiences.
Yeah, well, we're in negotiations now with a distributor, so we hope that that works out, because I agree. I've had many people who have seen it on their devices, and most of them have said they liked it. But then I've also had a lot of those people come to see it at a different film festival with an audience, and they go, oh, it's completely a different experience to see it with other people laughing, and with how large it is, and you see more specific things, and you see that human face.
Yeah, not to pry too much, but for distribution, are you looking at theatrical, or would that be streaming?
No, it would be theatrical. I do really want that. So yes, hopefully, knock wood, we'll get that done, and then of course it will then go to streaming in some.
And I think it would be incredible if that replicating any kind of JUNEBUG success with another excellent redhead and Jane Levy, maybe in the word circuits in the future.
Yeah, it's a very different time now. I mean, actually, JUNEBUG now is 20 years old this year. And independent film is like all film really is struggling because people don't go to the theaters as much. They don't have that audience experience as much. So we hope it's going to happen.
Awesome. And are there any projects that you're working on now, or even scripts that you're looking at, just anything in development that, you kind of see in the near future?
Well, I've written a script for the man who directed JUNEBUG, Phil Morrison, to direct. And so we're just beginning to try to float it out on the water and see if anybody will do it. It gets harder and harder, but
All right. Well, just want to thank you so much, Dave, for your time, Angus MacLachlan, and wish you future success with distribution for A Little Prayer. Played excellently here at the festival and can't wait to see what you're going to be up to next.
thank you.
We just received news that For a Little Prayer has received a nationwide distribution and should be showing up in theaters at the end of August, right when we are going to be releasing this episode. I'm happy to be joined this evening by Stephen Ball, who is an organist, improviser, composer, conductor, organ consultant, and a specialist in silent film accompaniment. Stephen occupies a rather unique space in the musical world of organ. In addition to being a Fulbright scholar, he is a part of a small number of artists proficient in the genre of the theater organ ever to have achieved a doctoral degree in music. Congrats on that. Some important firsts do include the world premiere of the first concerto for theater organ and orchestra, Once Upon a Castle in 2003 by Michael Daughtry, and the first silent film accompanied by a carillon. I will say, too, that I did see a video of you, Stephen, traveling to St. Louis, I believe it was, a few years ago, where you accompanied a screening of the classic film Hunchback of Notre Dame at the historic and reportedly haunted Tampa Theater.
At the Tampa Theater, yes, we have many famous ghosts there.
Really?
In particular, Fink, our projectionist, who likes to play with the theater staff, including me. So I don't know if any of your listeners are ghost story people, but I remember one day I was screening a film, just to orient the listeners. So silent film, when we talk about silent film, it's a misnomer. No film was ever silent. We're talking really about the first 40 years of film technology. So from about 1895 maybe to 1927 is the year that sound film comes in with a jazz singer. And what we think of as silent film today is probably maybe the last 20 years of that. So I'm a specialist in building these scores in the way that they would have been done in the 1920s. And to do this process, to create a film score, it's the same disciplines you'd use when you're making a film score for modern film. And it takes time and study. So an average film score for me takes about 40 hours from start to finish. And so the first thing that I would do would be to screen the film. And here's where Fink, the projectionist, comes in. So Fink is one of our ghosts, and he's a rather mischievous projectionist. And I was studying a film, and I had a friend sitting there watching the film with me. There was a table between the two of us, and my cup of coffee, which is a very important part of film scoring, was sitting between us. And here I am taking notes and watching scenes and who does what and what actions are happening. And I noticed that he picks up my cup of coffee and sets it down, picks it up again and sets it down, and does this about 3 or 4 times. And at a certain point, I'm really trying to concentrate on this film. I'm like, what are you doing? And he described that the cup of coffee on its own had traveled all the way to the very, very edge of the table, almost to the point of dropping off. And he was trying to see whether or not there was water there and if it was hydroplaning or something. There was no explanation for it at all. So we just assumed it was Fink playing games with us. And of course, I didn't notice it. It's all this stuff is always happening around me all the time. And the ghosts pretty much have become our co-workers at the theater.
Mm-hmm.
All the employees have seen.
Hey, he's respectable. You can still do your job while you're, doing it to the silent film as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of funny things. You can check the Tampa Theater website out. They have ghost tours. They'll tell you all about the various purported hauntings in the building. But it's part of the daily life of the theater. And I'm very privileged because I have a position as a theater organist. And I know most of the listeners probably thought, a what? And these organs, which are part of American movie palaces. So the Tampa Theater is a magnificent movie palace by John Ebertfest. It is the best example of a fully preserved interior with its original furnishings, probably about 95% of the original furnishings. So it's a very important place in terms of talking about the movie palace experience of these films. It was designed to take your mind away from the everyday concerns of life, and then you journey into this place which for all the world seems like it was some lost courtyard from 400 years ago that just somehow survived. The organ is a part of the experience of watching the film, so if I do my job correctly, I'm not only simulating the sounds of a theater orchestra from the 20s, but I so pull an audience into a film that they won't even notice that I'm there.
Wow.
So if at the end of a film, somebody says, I totally forgot you were there, that's the greatest compliment they could give.
That's incredible. And previous to this recording here at Ebertfest, we are currently screening the Guy Madden film Rumors, starring Cate Blanchett, and you were playing the organ previous to that movie. Just curious about the piece you're playing there and how you're influenced by the movie that's actually currently screening.
There is repertoire for the organ, in other words, pieces of music composed for the organ. Tonight, I was not playing classical organ repertoire. In fact, I was playing a set of music from the recent musical Wicked. So the organs that were installed in American movie theaters to accompany these silent films, there were about 7,000 organs installed. I would say fewer than 40 exist in their original homes. So the Virginia Theater is very privileged because they have an original instrument in its original house. And this is a beautifully restored movie palace. But with these instruments having to basically be trapped in their buildings with the arrival of sound film, they had to figure out what to do with them. And so it began to be the practice that organists would sometimes play overtures before the film to sort of entertain the audience, or play during the intermission, or in case the film broke. Because you have to remember, at the moment that sound film arrives, the Great Depression is also arriving. So a lot of organists and orchestra members who were also employed by the theaters, they lost their jobs. So oftentimes in the theaters, the organists, if they were able to still be employed, were playing pre-show music, just entertaining the audience. And that was an example of what I was doing here for Ebertfest. And in this case, the music you're selecting, you want to have something that hopefully your audience will know and respond to. It's sort of like the difference between a classical orchestra concert or being the Boston Pops. You know, my job as a theater organist for Ebertfest is kind of being the Boston Pops.
Sure. Yeah, and just the random seatmate that I had next to me, he's like, oh, I think that's Wicked, but it sounds a little different. So it's a really interesting interpretation, and, you know, I'd say pre-show blend of that too.
Playing before the movies is a totally different discipline than playing a silent film, because they're opposite goals. And actually, the organ has an elevator for that reason. So most of the big movie palaces, like St. Louis and the Tampa Theater and all this, the organ console, which is the only part of the organ you can see, will come up to stage level during a solo performance, which is what the pre-show concerts are. But for a film, it descends into the orchestra pit, and the idea is it's going to stay out of your peripheral vision so that whatever music you're making is going to draw you more into the film.
Interesting.
So the theater organs are unusual because the instrument was designed to be invisible. What you see an organist playing is the user interface. That's what controls the actual machine. And in this case, you have about 6 tons of equipment up behind the walls. And because of an electrical signal that's running to the organ chamber from the organ console, it's possible to have this organ console disappear on an elevator out of sight. That wasn't really possible technologically, even just a century before, because you had to have a direct mechanical link right between the organist's fingers and the keyboard right to the organ pipes themselves.
That said, is there any, I guess, kind of memorable things from the last couple of years of experiences at a theater house where you've been composing your music for a silent film?
They're all memorable in their own way. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But the experience of playing for silent movies, it's hard to summarize this, but it is a 3-way relationship that happens. And it's between the audience, the screen, and the artist. So the artist is reacting not only to what they see on the screen, but they're also reacting to the audience. So the more that an audience is into the film, in a way, the more fun I have. I think what I like most is when they don't expect how good it's going to be, if you'll forgive the expression. But I think most audiences that would come to a silent film would think, oh, well, this is going to be some boring old movie. And they don't ever expect to be totally drawn into it, because they don't realize that, the genius of the filmmakers already in that time, they had the same tricks of the trade we have, and they were manipulating audiences emotionally, if you will, in the same ways, but using different tools. What makes it uniquely powerful for the audience, and I think a way that they don't expect, is the missing element. You could reverse it and say, for example, with early radio, you can't see what the actors are portraying. Your imagination fills in the picture for you. So it's the same thing happening in a film. You can't hear what's being said in dialogue between the actors, but you don't realize this. Your imagination is actually filling that in. And that component of the imagination actively playing a part in the film makes for a unique, strong bond with the film that I find doesn't necessarily exist with sound film. You do still have this corporate entertainment experience. There's nothing like watching a film in a theater with an audience.
Yeah, here at the Ebertfest in general, it's some movies that would have been enjoyable in streaming. I've just, taken on a different name altogether, watching on the big screen with the audience.
The only word I have for it is electric. And so if your listeners have any opportunity at all to experience something like Ebertfest, do it, because it's not just the film, it's also the reaction of the audience, and the energy in the room is all part of it.
I would even say too, as you mentioned, seeing those films as manipulating the audience. Do you see yourself as pulling additional strings too, or how do you kind of see your relationship to the audience in that regard?
Perhaps, although, this is important, is that you have to always try to represent as well as possible the original intent of the film and its makers. And I try to always be very respectful of that. That was something my predecessor at the Tampa Theater, Rosa Rio, who was the oldest living professional in the industry, the emphasis was always that this was serious art. And the purpose of the art was always to respect the intent of the original producers of the film. A different score really substantially changes how you perceive the film artistically. So scores that are disrespectful to the film or take the audience out of the film or away from the film, they do a disservice. The purpose of the musicians is to enhance the overall emotional experience. The organ somehow is very different. It's kinetic. Like when the organ plays, you can actually physically feel it. Or what you said earlier with Wicked, I'm doing an interpretation of what the theater orchestra would have done from Wicked, but I'm using different instrumentation because the 1920s theater orchestra would have completely different instrumentation than what a modern Broadway pit orchestra would have. So here I am as an organist being as, the best way to describe being an organist is as much like being conductor and orchestra at the same time. So here I am and I have a 1920s orchestra. So I'm going to deploy my, my saxophones and my clarinets and my brass. I'm going to deploy them differently than a modern Broadway orchestra would, just because they don't have those tonal resources. And that's the fun of it. The organs are really nothing more than palettes of color. It's like an artist's painting a painting. If the painting is terrible, don't blame the person who put the color palette together. Sure. The fun of it is taking that color palette, whatever you're handed, wherever you go, because I travel all over the country doing this. And, you may have the strangest color palette ever, but using your imagination and in a way those limitations to paint the painting is the name of the game. You mentioned memorable experiences, and I will give you one in particular. It was in Woonsocket, Rhode Island for the American Theater Organ Society National Convention, ATOS, and they have a silent film every time they do a convention usually, and they asked me to do a film called Sunrise. And Sunrise, if any of our film nerds listening know this, tied for the first Academy Award along with Wings. And there's this remarkable place in the film where I can't be a plot spoiler, but
it's almost 100 years old. I think listeners will be very forgiving if you go ahead and do so.
Where the protagonist in the film appears to have lost his wife, that she's drowned. And there's this remarkable scene at night on a lake. And rather than wallpapering it with music, the choice in that score was to leave it completely silent. It was about 1.5 minutes. And the amount of tension and anxiety, and it was palpable. Like you could cut the air with a knife in that room. And it shows the importance not only of music, but also of silence in good film scoring. And so that was one of the more memorable scoring decisions I had made over the years, was just being able to somehow create, not only with what you put on the table, but also in that case, what you take off. That kind of tension in a film like that. That was really something.
Wow. I'm just very curious too, when you were younger, when you were really seeing this as potentially, a route you wanted to take in life, was it music that really got you into it originally, or did you already have a love of film or silent film, or did you always have those loves but separately when you were growing up?
I've always been fascinated with the organ. So the organ is an exact marriage of art and engineering and music. It's this mechanical marvel that somehow moves and has it's very much like a life of its own. The theater organ as an instrument didn't occur to me as a separate thing until I realized that they're associated with the concept of film and American movie palaces. So I didn't have the idea to study the theater organ right off the bat until I was introduced to one. And they're fairly rare beasts now. They're not always easily accessible or well curated so that you don't understand, why is this machine here? Like, I'm sure a bunch of people at Ebertfest were like, okay, it's a theater and there's an organ and there's this dude playing it and what's he playing? So there's a lot of learning as you go here with this. But the reason why I took to film scoring was because when I first tried my hand on it, I realized that I have something like a reverse synesthesia. If I see images, I hear sound and I hear music. It's very difficult to explain. The ability to compose is, if you have a blank slate and you're sort of devoid of other stimulus, so no background music, no other noise, the experience of watching film for me creates sonic effects in my head. And certainly music as well. And I have to work very quickly. If you saw my box of film scores, it looks ridiculous because it's things like, backs of napkins and ripped off pieces of envelopes, bits and pieces of paper, because I have to scratch these musical ideas out very, very quickly because they go away. They're constantly tumbling one on another into the next idea. And that ability to see image and relate it somehow to sound is what caused me to be fascinated by film scoring. And then to start studying, all right, what's going on with film scores? How are these composers doing this? Just from the very, very smallest elements, from the very fewest harmonic pieces, and just a single note added to a chord will create tension or emotion. How do they do that? That's fascinating to me. Why compose a film score rather than just, if you can find one, play an old film score? So like 20% of the films maybe have survived from the silent era. They're all printed on nitrate stock. It catches on fire and produces its own oxygen and deteriorates, and it's a huge mess. Not a lot of films survive. Maybe 20% of the scores survive. Film scoring only takes place 1915 with Birth of a Nation, and after, you have to have a studio structure large enough to have a music office willing to assemble bits of music that might or might not go along with the film. And even then, Rosie used to tell me, usually what the studio sent was terrible. The first thing that they would do in a week was throw it out. And then the music directors in the theater would get together and look and see what was in the library. They'd review the film. They'd see, all right, how long is this scene? What kind of emotion do we need? All right, well, maybe, 1 out of 400 pieces could work for this. Let's try an adagio from a Beethoven symphony or something. So this whole process of assembling a film score was very organic and happened on a weekly basis. But the emotional effect, let's just say that you could recreate perfectly a film score from the 1920s, as has been done. The emotional effect that music had on the audience is substantially different than the emotional effect it will have on an audience in modern times. Look at all that we've listened to in the past century. We don't listen to classical music in the same way. We wouldn't even experience Beethoven. It wouldn't even be performed in the same way. But since then, we've listened to Shostakovich and Mahler, and not just even classical music, all the pop music, country happened, rap, R&B happened. So an audience and where they're at emotionally, when they respond to music, is very different in modern times than it was then. And for that matter, even the organs themselves, in their way, they're antique pieces of sound equipment. They were state-of-the-art surround sound a century ago. We've really moved on since then. So making all of that relevant in some way to a modern audience, which is so many different types of media and sounds exposed to them, how do you keep the original intent of the producer of that film serious a century later? That's the reason why film composition is important in the present day and age for these films of the past.
Interesting. And is there a composer nowadays that you look at, maybe they incorporate the organ into their film scores, whether that's, not even a silent film? These days they may be like, oh, that's really translates well to a modern audience.
Yes. Nathan Barr has done some really extraordinary work with not just the organ, but also all sorts of instruments, using all sorts of timbres of different instruments and incorporating them in new ways into film scoring. Because where film scoring is headed right now is, just like everything else in the world of the arts, is becoming more and more industrialized. It's always economics. You can't just hire a symphony orchestra the way Bernard Herrmann had. It was a tremendously expensive proposition to do that. So it's the same thing you see happening in Broadway pit orchestras. Increasingly, you have this giant orchestra pit, and you look down in the pit, and there's like 3 guys playing keyboards, or if that. And fewer people are having to do more and more. There's a point where you're getting more quantity, but less quality. For example, what would I mean by that? Like, I mentioned Bernard Herrmann earlier. The scene d'amour, the way the strings sound the feeling that emotes, that can only come from a human. The machine can very accurately reproduce what a human would do with an instrument, but there's something more there. And that goes to what my definition of art is. And so this isn't just music, it's not just film, but art for me is when something is greater than the sum of its parts. So you can make the sound of a violin, you can sample the sound of a violin on a computer, you can have a computer anticipate how a violin would act when it sounds and then create that. That's called modeling. But there's something more there that's embedded in the human interaction with that instrument. And that's why, going all the way back to where we started, the theater organ as a standalone instrument, I mean, it was never designed to be the show. It was always designed to be part of the show. So it's part of the movie palace experience. And the films are themselves part of the movie palace. And so if you want to preserve the theater organ, you need to preserve the whole movie palace, preserve the film, which is its correct location that it would have been experienced, because it's the emotional effect of experiencing that film in that place. Nothing else makes you feel like that. And why is that important? Because that's our American cultural patrimony.
Wow. I think that's a really nice summation of everything we're discussing throughout tonight. Any upcoming shows you might be planning, that you've composed, that you're looking forward to?
The best way for me to tell an audience to look at upcoming shows is I have a website, stephenball.com, STEVENBALL. And if you check out the website, there's a link there that gives you any upcoming performances. And I would certainly enjoy meeting anyone from this podcast and continuing this conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much today, Stephen. I know that you've traveled and performed extensively from Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, Portugal to Ireland, the States, and suppose now this week you can add Champaign, Illinois to the list as well. So thank you so much. I do know it's been a highlight of a lot of attendees hearing people in the crowd before the show starts, just saying how welcoming and inviting that is, but also just kind of getting transfixed by your music right before they jump into another movie, another world of cinema, if you will. So once again, Stephen Ball, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kudos to Chaz Ebert, and we look forward to Ebertfest in the future as well.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks for listening to MediaMaker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is created by Sandra Abrams, Candace Block, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim and Inez Perez, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakerSpotlight.com for more information.
That